advisor who's already gave a presentation here. Today I want to talk to you about some solutions for real estate investment. Of course, that depends whether you are a developer, whether you're a foreign developer, whether you're just an investor, whether you're a customer. So depending on who you are, what you do, there might be different angle, different perception. So I'll try to keep it open so we can discuss after the presentation based on your needs and your position in the market. This is who we are, DFDL, so we're a regional firm. We work in all these countries. We started in countries that were not really accessible for investment back in the 90s. Cambodia was one of them at the time, 95. And actually we started our regional presence working on emerging markets, for emerging markets, and trying to find solutions for investors in emerging markets. Cambodia is our largest office, and in fact we are a regional firm, but our headquarters are in Phnom Penh, so it's probably one of the very few occasions that you will see that for a consulting / law and tax firm. So this is where we are, who we are. In Cambodia, we operate in collaboration with Cambodian lawyers, as we are required to do so for the legal part, for the tax part with licensed tax advisors, our partners. So for the legal part, this is done with Sarin and Associates, our long-term partners. These are the different areas we are advising on, and we do that in each of our office. So the different parts, real estate and construction is a big part of the practice. Of course, taxation goes with it, and I'll give you some also highlights on taxation issues. This is what I want to talk to you about. I'm not going to keep this too technical. The tax and legal considerations are quite often a bit heavy or a bit boring even, so I'll try to keep it very, very practical. And in fact, we worked with Realestate.com.kh to have them updating their investment guide, which is going to be released soon. So some of these things you will find in the updated guide, Realestate.com.kh guide, that's going to be released soon. To get started, this is what you're dealing with when you're in Cambodia, and some of you might know that already, but this is basically the core aspects of what you have to comply with. The boundaries from a legal and tax perspective of your project. Starting with the 2001 land law that basically made things possible. That 2001 land law confirmed that Cambodia has a private ownership system. It was already issued in 1992 in the first land law, but it confirmed that and it gave the opportunity for investors and owners and developers to register their property, and everything is based on that. That's really the core legislation that you need a country like Cambodia to make sure that your projects can happen. The cadastral system, so is a centralized system, and it allows for land and property to be registered everywhere in Cambodia. Of course, some remote areas are not yet registered, but it's getting there, and there's absolutely no exclusion. It can be registered property, it can be private property, it can be registered everywhere in Cambodia. In some neighboring countries, we have different systems, but compared to Laos, for instance, Cambodia is a lot more advanced. That registration system is what gives you the possibility to check whether the property has a valid title. So it's also very important for developers, for owners, for investors, for buyers. You had a series of changes back in 2008, 2010, 2013 that created new features in the Cambodian legislation, things that were not available before. So before 2009, 2010, it was not possible to have a title to a condo, for instance. Only land could be titled at the time. So starting 2009, 2010, we've been able to actually obtain titles to co-own buildings and units, and that's why you have all these projects that are possible right now that you've seen outside. Otherwise, you won't be able to buy a unit in a condo building. For the rest, we have an improvement in more recently in the way the framework is being organized. More registration procedures for real rights, which means registering your interest in land, registering mortgage, registering. So that's also giving more security to banks and financial institutions to make it happen. All these projects that you see being advertised outside are actually basing their commercial model on sales, but also financing for customers. And this is why, because without the PRACAS number 30, which is a regulation, this is notably on that basis that it's possible. 2015, new rules on how urban planning works. And of course, the change in Cambodia, as you've seen a lot of developments, the shape of Cambodia, the shape of Phnom Penh, the skyline is changing. That is not possible with clear regulations and on how to use the space, private and public space. This is what this is about. 2017, all these projects and more to come, but are putting together some new commercial practices. A lot has to do with management, managing properties. There was no standard in Cambodia. Now it's possible, and there are new regulations in place. So you can make sure when you're developing that you can bring your own model to manage your property, and when you're buying that you're protected under a set of regulation that's actually enforceable. There would be more developments. There are still a few things that are a bit missing. There's no harmonized construction code in Cambodia. So that's one of the developments. I touch base on more developments at the end of the presentation. Environmental code. Of course, all of that has to do with environments, and we want to make sure that the environment is preserved and protected. Not always the case, but there's a new set of laws that's being prepared. And a commercial contract law, that's a bit technical, but basically at the moment you don't have a clear structure to implement sales or sale contract between professionals, and that's something that's going to be provided under that law that's being finalized now. The main issue, so when you're talking about projects and developing projects and selling, this is what you have to deal with. The two main types of residential projects now in Cambodia, two hot types are condos and borees. I know that you had presentations yesterday already on this, so I'll keep it short. But basically, what you have to deal with when you start with condos is that for the new regulations actually only apply to new projects after 2010. As I said just previously, you couldn't actually title property units before 2010. So if some of you or the developers want to actually acquire existing buildings constructed before 2010, and you want to actually sell units in these buildings, you would have to entirely restructure the titling and the holding of these buildings. It's possible, but it's taking quite long. Enforcing co-ownership rules, and that's a problem at the moment because you're still a bit limited. Like enforcing leases, it's something that's possible in Cambodia, but going to court is still a bit of a problem. So the recommendation is always that you structure your co-ownership rules with very detailed information, with checks, balances, just to make sure that you're not going to be exposed later on to claims, because once you go there, it can really affect your project. As a customer, and also, of course, you want to know exactly what's going to happen to you. When you buy a unit in a building, you want to make sure that the management is going to be efficient, and that you can claim to the management. Some of the issues are also at the moment, and we're trying to address that with the governments, and the fact that there's a lot of new projects, a lot of construction going on. It's not always clear how or what kind of rights you can expect to have based on the construction permit applications. So quite often developers come to see us and tell us that unfortunately they had their layout and master plan approved, but they cannot title the entire size of the building and the floors. There might be discrepancies between what's been approved and what is actually being implemented, and gaps may trigger some issues with titling and might impact for developers, might also impact the sales process. So for that, again, a recommendation is to make sure that your construction permit applications and the procedure is actually followed very strictly, and you get the right support from the start, because fixing things when they're already done on the paper is a lot more difficult in Cambodia. On the Bore side, the hot issues at the moment that developers are facing is that in the consolidation process, it's quite a long process. You might see some new developments that are just extended there. The size of a project, the area of a project, getting the right land documentation in place for large projects is quite difficult, take quite a long time, and it might actually delay the implementation of the project. So without naming any development, but you see the larger Bore development, you see that sometimes it's not always easy to get the land registered, and again for financing it might delay things, because if you don't get the titles issued right away, then you can't go to the bank. The developer can't finance with the bank, and the buyers can't really get finance from the bank as well, because the key is always for financing when you're going to give the collateral, when you're going to give the title. So that's very important to know. The way it works with Bore is that you're consolidating titles and then splitting titles in units. That's a process that takes months. So again, to make sure that you know exactly how and when this is going to happen is actually what makes your project really possible, because you can really only structure your sales process once you know that. Internal regulations, same as for condo, it's the same thing. You need to have clear regulations for Bores. There's a model in place, which is becoming a bit more sophisticated. We're doing a lot of these things at the moment, with our clients, and you need to do that, to have that before announcing on the sales. Quite often, the internal regulation is an essential part of your sale process anyways, because it shows the rights that the customers will have, quite sometimes in competition, because you need to show to your customers that you have basically the advantage. You have actually a dedicated management unit and structure that actually will provide all the benefits to them as owners and customers. And then also, so dividing the plots into different units is also something that sometimes creates some issues. Again, based on the financing, what we see now is that a lot of buyers in Bores are actually buying with the customer, with the developer financing first, so you don't need a collateral for that. But quite often, because of the rates provided by developers are quite high, they want to refinance with the bank, and they need to wait. So they buy the property with a 3 installment scheme, so they pay their installments first, and after that their monthly payments. And after 2 or 3 years, because they take that quite often over 10 years, they want to get to a bank to have lower interest rates. Some of the developers in Cambodia charge as high as 18% per year as interest, where banks actually now charge around 7-8%. And it's actually quite important to have the title in hand, otherwise the bank won't accept to refinance. And sometimes for some developments it takes 2 or 3 years to get the titles issued. You buy the house is already there, but you don't have your title in hand. So that's a bit difficult at the moment, because titling a 500 unit project takes time, of course. So again, something that you might want to check if you're buying, and as a developer you want to make sure that you can actually issue your title in time, so your clients will not be in default of payment. Taxes. That's always a big part of the concern, because that's where, for a developer, that's where you basically define your margins, and depending on how you're structured, that's of course that can actually have quite a big impact. The main taxes are, these are the main taxes. So 4% transfer tax on property transfer, 20% on tax on income. So that basically would be for your development company. So when you do sales, you will have 20% income tax, then 10% VAT on sales, 10% VAT on lease, and 10% withholding tax on lease payments. So what you can see from this, I'm not going to be to detail that too much, and the information will be available online anyways. But some of the issues is that you might have, so if you're doing condo, for instance, you might have a double tax, a transfer tax problem, because when you title your units as a developer, you have, for instance, on 100 units, you only start the transfer process to the developer because you convert your title at the beginning. So when you sell one unit, you would put your title, the 99 remaining units, the titles of these units, in the name of the developer. That's already a 4% transfer tax. And when you sell your units, your 99 remaining units, you would have to pay another 4%. So it's actually sometimes, depending on how you're structured and the timeline of your transaction, sometimes it's actually 8%. And then you see that potentially a double tax impact also on leasing, that would mainly be for retail or some project where, for instance, foreigners want to actually acquire property. They would sometimes have to lease, because of course there's a restriction on foreign ownership in Cambodia, and so you would basically face a 10% plus 10% impact on the leasing, the lease payment, and that's in fact quite high. The types of structure we're dealing with in Cambodia, so that would be mainly for developers, but still for buyers quite interesting, because you know how developers are structured. Some of these developers you see outside actually have that kind of structure in place. Just give you an overview of how this works, and without being too technical, usually you have an offshore holding. So this would be a type of structure that's relevant for foreign developers. You would have an offshore holding. Quite often they're established in Singapore, Hong Kong, and they actually have 100%. So they're a developing company that is 100% owned, but this is a Cambodian company. They need to have, and that's where things get a bit complicated in Cambodia, because quite often you need to have a two company structure with a landowning company and a developing company. So this is the operation company, and this is what holds the lands. Why you need to have that, and not only one structure, is because the foreign entity, so the foreign developer, is not Cambodian. So this needs to be a joint venture with a Cambodian shareholder, 51%, holding 51% of the shares. This is 49%. Or this owns 49% in this, or this owns 49% in this. This is how it works, and that also triggers a lot of tax implications. And quite often you have a third entity, which is a management company that's basically managing from offshore, or providing, or sometimes it's also incorporated locally, but providing some management services, including the core management of a project and maintaining the core for a condo project, maintaining the common parts of the building. That can be an independent contractor, or that can be related to the same group. That depends on the project. There's no requirement for this. Okay. So in the end, this can be 100% foreign owned. This can be 100% foreign owned, but this has to be 51% Cambodian owned. Okay. There are different ways to structure this, and either you register your capital, so it's a $20 million project. You capitalize here, or you capitalize here, or partly here, partly here. Quite often what we see is that this company is going to only hold the land. So let's say you have a $20 million project, and the value of the land is $5 million. So this is going to be capitalized up to $5 million, or through a shareholder loan. And here you have the remaining. So 25 million would be here. The construction cost, development cost for the construction for the building would be in this company, not in this company. Okay? And this company would be leasing the land to this company. That's the basic structure that we quite often see in Cambodia. So, again, without going too far into the details, that's where you will start having your tax implications. So, basically, you have implications here when you buy the land, 4% tax. You have here you're selling, so you have 20% income tax. Here there's a management, so it's a service, so there's a VAT. Here you're leasing, so you have 10% and 10% leaseholding. Yeah, and yeah, so that's not a small thing. These are the taxes we were discussing earlier. So as we said, there's also some tax, quite high and important tax implication when you repatriate profits. And as you might know, there's a feature of the Cambodian legal system that allows you to get tax exemptions. You might know we call that QIP or CDC license. QIP goes for Qualifying Investment Project. So you would get some tax exemptions, but the tax exemptions work actually as a tax deferral. So you get up to 9 years of profit tax suspension, I would say. I'm saying suspension because when you start repatriating profit, if you want to repatriate profit during the 9 years, then the tax will finally apply. So there's a clawback mechanism. So you have to find ways to keep your profit in Cambodia. Of course, all the investment laws in Cambodia are designed to make investors come to Cambodia, but also stay in Cambodia and reinvest in Cambodia. So you have to find a way to reinvest your profit for the first 9 years or repatriate your profits, and there are ways of doing that. There are valid legal ways of doing that offshore. So it could be through either royalties, so to your management company, or if you're using a brand, an international brand, it can be through loans. So you have part of your development and project that is financed through loans from the offshore holding, here and here, and you just repay interest, and you repay the loan over a period of time that allows you to have a lighter taxation on your profit repatriation. Service fees, also, that's a way to repatriate. So one of these entities could actually provide services to this offshore company. In that case, there's only a VAT implication. And dividends, that's where it's most heavily taxed, because if you repatriate profit, you have a 20% profit tax here, between here and here, but you also have a dividend tax, which is 14%. So a consolidating amount which is quite high in the end, around 30% of taxation if you want to repatriate profit. So even if you have tax incentive, it's still going to apply when you repatriate profits. There are a few things that you can do to reduce that. So structuring, as we said, and having your offshore structure in a country that has entered into a double taxation agreement with Cambodia. There's only a series of countries that have done that at the moment. Singapore is one, China also, and Vietnam. So you can actually repatriate profit in a way that's more efficient, because your 14% tax here would be reduced to 10%, thanks to the double taxation arrangement. The way it works, the double taxation arrangement, is you still need to apply for a license to get the benefit of the reduced tax rate. So you need to actually do the application before you only pay the limited amount. Just a note on the qualified investment project, the tax exemption only applies for certain sectors. So, and that's a big problem. The regulation, the tax incentive scheme is going to be reshaped, but at the moment, real estate development is not a sector that's eligible for tax incentive. So, residential, you're selling, you're a developer, you can't get the tax incentive. On the other hand, when you're developing commercial activities, retail, shopping malls, mixed use, entertainment centers, hotels, office buildings, then you can get at least partially the tax incentive. And so what we quite often see is a project where you have companies here, so you might have a part of the development company that is under tax incentive, or you might want to create another company on the side to develop an activity that is subject to tax incentive. So you can actually have at least part of your project that is that has on this slide. I have a building here, yes, so it's easy. So basically the way it will work is that you take some of the units here, so you decide, so this is the foreign part of the building. In Cambodia, you can buy, as a foreigner, you can buy only 70% of the units. The 30% need to remain Cambodian, okay? The way we structure some transactions is that you have part of the units, you take a number of floors that you assign to a foreign company, offshore company, that is going to be either an agent, it can be your own company, related company in Singapore. If you're a Singaporean developer, you can just actually do sales from Singapore. And we take a number of units here, so let's say 10 floors for instance, and you sell those 10 floors in the units offshore. You can actually do that while having those 10 floors registered with the offshore holding, because you don't need to sell from the Cambodian company, you can just sell here. So basically you have your 10 floors that are at the beginning there with the developing company in Cambodia, but you transfer them to the offshore holding. That's possible in the Cambodian law. And you would sell directly the units offshore. That will reduce your tax, because you won't have the 4% transfer tax that applies. So the two transfer tax issues, you will only have one, which is one here until here and here, between here and here, and not here, with the buyer, the foreign buyer, and you will have no corporate tax at this level, and you will have no VAT. So that can really reduce your cost. But you can't, of course, you can't sell the entire project like that, but you can decide to really assign part of your units to a foreign entity, and the sales will only be offshore, and there will be no local taxation on this part of the sales. We call that bulk sale finance and structure. We can give you, of course, more information on how it works. It also keeps things quite safe for banks. The problem that some of the banks have in Cambodia at the moment is that they don't want to sell to finance foreigners, because foreign buyers who are not based in Cambodia, they're a risk for banks, for local banks, because if the foreign buyer defaults, then they can't enforce against him. But if you're selling with the offshore holding in Singapore to a Singapore buyer, then the offshore holding has a direct relationship with the buyer. So Singapore, the holding is in Singapore, the buyer is in Singapore. So in case the buyer defaults, it makes it a lot easier for the offshore holding to, and the bank, if the bank finances the unit, to actually go after the buyer in his home jurisdiction. So that also can be quite interesting for that matter. That's just to show you what happens, and some of you might not know, but at the end of the project, so when you see all the units completed and the project has been sold entirely and up and running, you don't have a development company, you don't have an handling company. All of this will close. So if you're a customer, you're buying from a company here, and they completed the project, that's it. They're gone. They sold. Only remains the buyers, the customers, and the management company. So that's very important to make sure that after everything has completed, you have a strong management, because that's the only thing that's left in from the initial structure. And all these companies would basically liquidate and deregister. Quite often, project companies or developers register one company per project. So they would just liquidate these two. And sometimes even the construction company register, for tax reasons, one construction company per project. After that, it will disappear. So the only relationship between the customer would be between with this management company or the offshore holding company. That's a question, and maybe I'll finish on this. We quite often have how to buy in Boreas as a foreigner. For condos, it's okay because you have those 30% and 70% split. That needs to be Cambodian based on the law, and that can be foreign owned. So you would get here a title in the name of a foreigner. It's possible you can register in Cambodia. Fine. For Boreas, it's not possible technically to have a villa title in the name of a foreigner because of the restriction. Only Cambodian citizens can hold land. So the way it works is actually quite interesting if you want to make it happen, but actually you can't make it happen on your own as a customer. You need the developer to structure it in a way that's actually relevant. But the way it will work is that you have the developer setting up a landholding company. The landholding company will hold the individual units of on the land, the land titles, and will lease to the customer on a long-term basis. That it can be actually 50 years renewable. So total it could be 100 years here. That you know already probably. It's possible to do it anyways. Very few developers do that. Well, I'm not sure because it's too sophisticated or complicated. But actually, it's actually possible. The only thing is that makes it a bit more complicated is that leasing has a tax implication that's quite high. So, and it would create some additional tax implications because leasing would actually trigger some revenue between the developer and the buyer under the lease, and that will also create some tax implications. The way to do it really safely and efficiently is to have that kind of structure where you have a foreign shareholder that actually remains the property manager, who remains in the company. So he's basically managing the relationship during the long-term lease with all the customers. And you will have the Cambodian shareholder, who could be the developer, to hold the 51% of the shares. To make it also very efficient on a tax, from a taxation perspective, you can have this long-term lease only for the land. So you only, as a customer, lease the land, and you build the house under a construction contract directly with the construction company. So the developer could actually structure it this way and reduce the tax implications, because you would only actually pay the tax implication for the land itself. And in Bore project, the price of the land compared to the cost for the building, for the construction, is very limited. Usually you're talking about 1/5 to 1/10 of the entire price. So basically you face the tax implication only on the land title transfer, and not on the construction, not on the transfer of the house itself, which is the main value of the project. And you just make sure that the foreign buyer will actually enter into a separate contract directly with the developer construction company to make sure that the specification of the construction is going to be determined by the developer, because you don't want every foreigner buying in a Bore to actually have different types of construction. It still needs to be in line with the project development strategy and schedule. So you want a master plan. So you want to make sure that that's perfectly consistent. But that's possible. At the moment, we don't see that many developers doing that. quite often developers are a bit skeptical about this because they think that mainly person buying who buys in Bora is mainly Cambodians, or they just don't want to create a separate structure, specific structure for foreigners. You don't have a Bora here. You don't have a developer developing a Bora only for foreigners. That doesn't exist, and probably won't exist because there's no market for that alone. But on the other hand, it's possible to assign some areas in the Bora, so you can decide to have a street or part of a section of the Bora that will be for foreigners, or for each street in a Bora, you can determine that you have a section of the street that could be sold to foreigners, and it doesn't have to be isolated units. It could be mixed, but you could basically decide to structure it this way, and have, I don't know, 10-15% of the Bora that you would keep as titles for foreigners with that kind of structure. Of course, we can tell you more about this if you are interested. This is all what's going to happen in Cambodia for the next few months or years. Lots of developments, a lot of new laws, and these sectors are quite booming at the moment. We can tell you more about this. You would have it covered in partly in the Realestate.com.kh investment guide. So a lot of new perspectives. So manufacturing is one of the key sectors. Special economic zone with a new special economic zone law, and you will have a construction code that's going to be passed as well. In the tourism sector, again, a new investment law that's going to create new sectors for investment with new incentive. So that's going to be quite interesting. So that means that probably we have next year a new presentation on all this to give you some more updates. Thank you. I can take questions if you have any question.
Yeah, we have just a couple minutes. If anyone has a quick question, we can get it in quick before the next presentation. Remember, you can ask a question in English, Khmer, or Chinese.
Yes, I will only respond in English.
Fair enough.
The structure you showed for foreign entity holding the condominium, you say it was structured for bulk.
Yes.
Why would it not be feasible to do it on an individual unit basis? So you could buy one unit per section through Hong Kong.
You can do it, yes. So as a foreigner, if you want to set up your own, or if you already have your entity, a Hong Kong entity, or you can actually buy the unit and put it in the name of that entity.
So then you can transfer that without any tax implication.
Exactly, fine. It's the same process. Yes.
Okay, great. Maybe if anyone has any questions, they can track down Guillaume later.
Yes.
I want to give him a big thank you for presenting with us today.
Thank you.